All right, so this week we're going to talk about balance and value, discuss a couple key terms and elements of that. So first off, balance is the equilibrium of opposing or interacting forces in a pictorial composition. So this is a bookshelf made by Joseph Albers, and you can see that there's equal parts on both sides, which gives it a really great balance to the piece. Axis is a line of reference around which a form or composition is balanced. So this is a piece called A Line Made by Walking by Richard Long. So this is actually photographic documentation of the video performance. And how this worked was for an hour on public television in 1967, you were able to watch this piece, and what it was a camera person walking and following kind of this line that was created in these natural spaces. And how that line was created was there was a person that was walking ahead of the filmmaker, and he was walking through these spaces, and his body kind of created a natural imprint. So as he walked along the grass or in between fields or anything, we were kind of following this natural line that was made. So a line created this sort of balance and calming feeling, but there's just equal parts on both sides, and it's all based on this axis. Equilibrium is the visual balance between opposing compositional elements. So in this piece called UA Playhouse, New York, by Hiroshi Sugimoto, this is actually a photograph, and how this photograph was made was the artist set up a camera and did a really long exposure in this movie theater, and it took one photograph for the duration of the entire movie. And so what happened was all that light coming out of the screen was captured and made into just one big white square. It was so much light, it just turned that portion of the photograph completely white because there was so much light coming out of the movie. So in this piece you see that there's kind of equal objects on both sides again. It's very pleasing, but there's just so much balance throughout this entire piece. It creates a really wonderful sense of equilibrium, as if everything is where it should be. You can imagine sitting in the theater and feeling just very calm, kind of as if you were part of this beautiful moment. All right, another piece that has a great example of equilibrium is this piece by Alexander Calder. It's called Vertical Foliage. So this is actually a mobile that would hang from the ceiling and kind of balance. It might even move a little bit, but it would stay in this kind of perfect balance. So not only are there kind of equal elements on both sides, and it feels like kind of this natural, not necessarily perfect balance, a little bit different objects on both sides, but still balanced somehow. And also, each of these little metal pieces, if you were to take one off, it would throw off the balance of the piece. So it's really kind of actually meticulously balanced in the weight of it as well. And I think the name of this vertical foliage is a great name because it really does look like it's like a fern or something like that. It's sort of growing naturally into space. So this is a great example of equilibrium being achieved in a piece. All right, imbalance. Imbalance occurs when opposing or interacting forms are out of equilibrium in a pictorial composition. So in this piece by Philip Guston called Transition, we see that there's a bunch of stuff kind of piled up on the top and not much at the bottom, not many images represented, and then everything is kind of slid to the right of the scene. So there's kind of nothing on the left side. So things are not really where they should be, and there isn't equal and opposing forces on all sides. Now, the way that we create this kind of imbalance, or we imagine this imbalance, is we kind of relate objects and images to ourselves. So we know that if we put all this stuff on the top of the pictorial plane, gravity is going to want to pull it down. And that's where we like things to be. We want the heavy things on the bottom because that's where they would be naturally. But by putting them at the top, it feels a little off, it feels a little weird. So what happens when you create this imbalance is you create kind of an unease for the viewer. So when I look at this piece, I feel like really weird about it. Like those objects, I don't know what they are, but they almost look like they could be like raw meat or carcasses, and there's something ominous about this whole scene. I kind of am thinking the worst of what's happening here because it just feels so imbalanced and off. So yeah, imbalance creates a weird sense of unease. Things are not quite right. They're not where they should be. All right, this is an example of bilateral symmetry. Bilateral symmetry is balance with respect to the vertical axis. So if we were to take this painting and and we were to cut it from top to bottom right in the middle and then fold it over on itself, it would be pretty much the same on both sides. So they would be equal objects or equal images on both sides. Now what this does is it creates kind of a static, still, or unchanging feeling, which is perfect for this image because this is a painting of Anna Wintour by Alex Katz. Now Anna Wintour is a real person. She's alive today, and she is the head chief top person at the Vogue in the United States, and she has been for a long time. And this is a great way to represent her because she is this unchanging, very stable, very rule-oriented kind of person that has really shaped culture for a long time. So representing her as kind of almost like a pillar is a great way of doing it because she's powerful and unchanging. All right, asymmetrical balance. So this is balance achieved with dissimilar objects that have equal visual weight or equal eye attraction. So this is a piece called Supremely Black by Chaim Steinbach. And so this is a type of balance, even though it's a little bit different than the last one, because there's more red boxes and less black pictures, but the shelf that they sit on, there's more of the black shelf and less of the kind of red side, and it kind of creates this balance. So not only is balance achieved through the shapes and sizes of the objects, but it's also kind of achieved through the color. So it still feels very balanced, even though it's kind of off. There's something different about it. So again, another type of balance. All right, balance through value and texture. So when we put black against white, it gives a stronger contrast than gray against white. So in the image you see at the top, there's a gray cube and a black cube, but my eye goes straight for that black cube, and then I kind of notice the gray cube on the side, so that our eye attention goes straight to that black one. Now, any visual texture with a variegated dark and light pattern holds more interest for the eye than does a smooth, unrelieved surface. So at the very bottom, we see kind of this wishy-washy, smushy kind of black and white pattern, and then right next to it, there's kind of this gray cube. Now, actually, both of them probably equal about the same type of gray. If you were to mix that smushy thing together, if it were paint and then make it into a gray, it probably looked like the gray cube next to it. But because there's such contrast and kind of movement and motion through it, our eye goes right to it. So that pattern really holds our attention. Now we look at the photograph right above it. There's these two figures kind of walking on the bottom right-hand corner, and my eye goes right to them because that one figure has got a very black outfit on, and then the person next to him's got this black hat, and I just noticed that right away. And then my eye goes to kind of that mountain range on the upper left-hand side. So we see this as kind of an asymmetrical balance in those colors, but it kind of creates a balance, but also that high contrast is where we notice it. And then once I've noticed that mountain and those people, then I kind of notice the sky and the water that have a lower value contrast next to them. So this is kind of a way that we can create attention through the values, but also create balance as well. All right, another type of balance is radial balance, which is a composition in which all visual elements are balanced around and radiate from a point. So the example I have for this is a dandelion. You see radial balance actually a lot in nature, which is why I chose that image. You can think of flowers as a good example for having radial balance. All right, mandalas are mandalas are a radial concentric organization of geometric shapes and images commonly used in Hindu and Buddhist art. So in the image we see at the bottom, there's a Buddha right in the middle, and then all these kind of patterns that are equally balanced going out from the center. Now this is a type of radial balance, these mandalas, and the reason why you see these in kind of faith-based imagery or religious imagery is because they create such unity, holistic unity. Everything is connected, everything comes together. It's a very harmonizing and calming image to look at, but there's a lot of power from it too. All right, another type of balance is all-over pattern. So this is a composition that distributes emphasis uniformly throughout the two-dimensional surface by repetition of similar elements. So in this painting by Lee Krasner, we see that all this kind of texture and pattern and different colors going on all over the piece, but my eye doesn't go to one space or look at one thing first. My eye just kind of looks over the whole thing at once. So this is a type of balance, but it doesn't really have a focal point, and it just kind of makes you feel like there's a bunch of people talking or moving around or doing something like that, but there's a bunch of things going on and all at once that makes kind of a whole. All right, value. Value is the measure of relative lightness and darkness. So value is achromatic, is black, gray, or white with no distinctive hues. So chroma is another word for color, and if we call something achromatic, it is the absence of color. So imagine taking a photograph and then converting that photograph to black and white. What you've done there is you've created an achromatic image, something that has no color in it and just exposes the value scale of that image. So that's a really good way to think of it. And we have a 9-point value scale below it. All right, value contrast is the relationship between areas of dark and light. So you can have high value contrast or low value contrast. Now the highest value contrast in this image below is where the black cube and the white cube come up next to each other. Whenever you have black and white together, because they're so different in value, they're opposite ends of the spectrum, we call that a high value contrast. Now, what would be the example of a lower value contrast is those kind of gray squares, or gray circles in the squares. So that's a little bit lower. So the white next to the gray is a little bit lower, and then the black next to the gray is a little bit lower. So this is a good example of value contrast. So where in this kind of origami photograph where you can see the black triangles that touch the white triangles, that would be an area in the image that has really high value contrast. My eye goes right to it. I perceive a lot of depth. It has a lot of high value contrast. Now, where the triangles are a little bit more similar, if gray tones, that's a lower value contrast. And that's sort of how we define high and low in images. Value emphasis, the use of light and dark contrast to create a focal point within a composition. So in this image right here, we see a plane going through the sky, and my eye goes right to that plane because there's such a high value contrast of the white sky against the black plane. So even though there's darker parts in the clouds and lighter parts, there isn't such a direct shift where there's one color right next to each other, one value right next to each other that's creating that emphasis. So wherever you have white and black right next to each other in an image and then gray is around it, your eyes are going to go right to the high value contrast.